You know what's strange? Some of the most thoughtful, emotionally aware people you'll ever meet are also some of the most tired. Not because they're doing too much, but because their mind never really clocks out. They sit in their car after work, replaying something they said hours ago, adjusting it, rewriting it, wishing they had said it differently. They type a simple message, then delete it, rewrite it, trying to predict every possible way it could be misunderstood. And at night, when everything is finally quiet, their body is in bed, but their mind is still in conversation with moments that never even happened. Some people are not exhausted because they care too little. They're exhausted because their mind never fully stops preparing. And here's the part most people don't realize. What we call overthinking doesn't always begin as a problem. For a lot of people, it began as a way to stay safe. In this video, we're going to slow this down and really look at it. What psychology actually calls this pattern? What's happening inside your brain when it won't let go? Why it often starts much earlier than people realize? And what it might quietly reveal about the kind of person you are. Because this isn't just about thinking too much. It's about understanding a mind that learned to stay on for a reason. Psychology actually has a name for this. It's called maladaptive rumination, which sounds clinical. But what it really describes is simple. A mind that keeps returning to the same thought loops, especially around uncertainty, past moments, or social interactions that never felt fully settled. It reopens the conversation, rechecks the tone, looks for the meaning behind the meaning, and that matters. Because people often assume this comes from weakness or insecurity or just being too sensitive. But that's not always what's happening. Very often, this kind of mind is strong in pattern recognition. It notices subtle shifts. It tracks details. It keeps trying to connect what happened with what it might mean next. The issue is not that the mind lacks intelligence. The issue is that it rarely gets the message that the search is over. And what matters most is this. A mind like this usually did not become this vigilant by accident. For a lot of people, this pattern didn't begin in adulthood. It began much earlier. Sometimes in childhood, sometimes in adolescence, in places where the emotional weather changed fast and you learned to notice it before anyone had to explain it. Maybe you learned to read someone's face before you spoke. Maybe you could tell, just from the way a door closed, what kind of evening it was going to be. Maybe one small mistake could shift the whole atmosphere in the room. And when you grow up in that kind of unpredictability, the mind learns something very quickly. Anticipate more, and you may stay safer. Read the room early, and you may avoid the impact. Think ahead, and maybe you can prevent what hurts. So the thinking becomes constant, not because you are broken, not because you are dramatic, not because you enjoy living in your head, but because some part of you learned that staying mentally ahead of things was a form of protection. And that changes the meaning of overthinking completely, because what looks like overthinking now may be a nervous system that learned a long time ago that peace could change without warning. In that light, this isn't just a flaw, it's an adaptation. A very intelligent mind doing exactly what it once had to do to feel a little more prepared, a little less exposed, a little safer. And once a mind learns to stay that alert, it doesn't always know when the danger is over. Part of that has to do with how the brain keeps itself running. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning, analysis, and self-reflection, stays highly engaged. And the default mode network, the system tied to background thought and inner narration, keeps generating mental activity even when nothing urgent is happening. So the mind keeps working long after the moment has passed. You're walking through a parking lot, and part of your brain is still rewriting one sentence from 5 hours ago. You're at the sink, washing dishes, and suddenly you're rehearsing a conversation that may never happen. For some people, the mind does not become quiet when the day is over. In it simply finds something else to solve. And that matters, because not all overthinking is the same. And sometimes, thinking deeply is useful. Psychologists sometimes describe one form of this as reflective rumination. And this is the kind of inward thinking that helps a person understand their emotions, notice their patterns, and make sense of what they're carrying. In balance, it can strengthen self-awareness and even deepen emotional intelligence. But there is another form, brooding rumination. This is when thought stops helping and starts circling. You're no longer processing, you're dwelling. You don't move toward clarity, you stay inside the problem. And that's where the cost begins. Sleep gets lighter, decisions get harder. A small social moment keeps replaying long after it ended. Even the body stays tense, as if the mind is still waiting for something unresolved. Most overthinkers don't live entirely in one mode or the other. They slide between both. And that slide is often hard to notice. What begins as insight can quietly become self-entrapment. And this is where the trap becomes harder to see. Cognitive psychologists sometimes describe it as the illusion of mental progress. The mind feels like it is doing something useful. It feels active, focused, responsible. So you open the same email again, not because there is anything new in it, but because some part of you believes one more pass might finally bring clarity. You replay one sentence you said, then replay it again because it feels like another 15 minutes of analysis might finally help you settle. But activity is not the same as resolution. And that is the trap. The loop survives because it does not feel pointless. It feels careful. It feels responsible. It feels like you are still working on the problem, even when you are only circling it. And that leads to something most people miss. Why just stop thinking about it is usually too simple. Because when your brain feels like it is working on a problem, it does not always care whether that work is leading anywhere. Sometimes the act of analyzing itself can feel rewarding. Part of that may involve dopamine, the chemical linked to motivation and problem solving. Not in some dramatic way, just enough that the mind keeps leaning back into the process. So even imagined problem solving can feel strangely compelling, not because it is bringing you peace, but because it creates the feeling that you are doing something. And for an overthinking mind, doing something often feels safer than letting the question remain unanswered. So no, this was never just a discipline problem. Sometimes the mind keeps going not because it is weak, but because thinking itself has started to feel like control. And yet, this same pattern can reveal something surprisingly human. People who overthink are often deeply perceptive. Research has linked higher levels of rumination with stronger cognitive empathy, the ability to sense what someone else may be feeling, even when they have not said it directly. These are often the people who hear the change in someone's tone before they hear the words, who notice the shift in a room before anyone else seems to catch it, who understand sometimes almost too quickly that words do not just carry meaning, they carry weight. And that kind of awareness is not nothing. It can make a person thoughtful, careful, emotionally intelligent, quietly attuned to what others miss. But this is where the cost enters, because perception without resolution is exhausting. The same mind that notices what others miss can also get trapped in what it cannot settle. It catches the nuance, it feels the tension, it senses the unspoken change, but it does not always know how to put any of that down. And that is the burden, not just feeling more, but having a mind that keeps trying to do something with what it feels. Which leads to one of the hardest truths for an overthinking mind to accept. Not everything can be solved by more thinking. Some things need to be felt. Some need to be grieved. Some need to be decided. And some need to be released without ever becoming fully explainable. Because overthinking often tries to do something noble. It tries to create certainty. If I can understand this better, name it more clearly, replay it one more time, maybe I can finally stop feeling unsettled. But not every form of tension loosens through analysis. Some experiences do not need more thought. They need space. Space to be unfinished, space to be uncomfortable, space to exist without being mentally chased until they collapse into an answer. And once a person sees that, the goal starts to change. It is no longer how do I stop having thoughts? It becomes how do I stop handing every thought so much authority? And that is where therapy often helps. Therapists who work with chronic overthinking are usually not trying to erase thought. They are helping people change their relationship to it. One approach that does this is acceptance and commitment therapy, which teaches a skill called cognitive diffusion. The idea is gentle but powerful. A thought is not always a fact. It is not always insight. It is not always danger. Sometimes it is simply your mind generating a story in real time. So instead of "this silence means something is wrong," the shift becomes "my mind is generating a threat story right now." That one sentence creates just enough distance for the nervous system to breathe. And often, relief begins when a thought stops sounding like a command. This is why small shifts matter. You can name the loop while it is happening. You can ask, "Am I solving this or am I circling it?" You can notice when your body is already tense before your mind asks for another round of analysis. And sometimes, you can delay the mental review for a few minutes, not to suppress the thought, just to remind yourself that not every thought deserves your full obedience. So if this felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with one thing above all. Overthinking is not a defect. Very often, it is a mind that learned to stay alert for reasons that once made sense. And healing does not always begin by forcing that mind to be quiet. Sometimes it begins by teaching it, slowly, gently, that it no longer has to stand guard all the time. Some minds were never taught how to rest, only how to prepare. And sometimes healing begins the moment that mind realizes it is finally allowed to put something down. If you recognized yourself in this, leave a word in the comments or even a short sentence about the pattern you see most clearly in yourself now. If this video gave language to something you have been carrying for a long time, letting it know with a like really helps more people find it. And if Peacite Shelter feels like the kind of place where your inner world becomes a little easier to understand, subscribe and stay close. That is what this space is for. Not to judge the patterns you carry, but to help you see them more clearly, hold them more gently, and loosen their grip one layer at a time. Because sometimes overthinking is only the surface. If your mind does not just think too much but also stays on guard too easily, the next video will help explain why. This one was about the thoughts. The next one is about the system that may still be scanning for danger even when life looks quiet.